before the hammer came down on Lot 31, sealing the transfer of a battle-scarred Belgian Malinois to a private security contractor who had flown in from Calgary with a company checkbook and an $11,000 ceiling. A 29-year-old primary school teacher named Iris Veylan ducked under the velvet rope, walked to the center of the auction floor, and raised a single creased $50 bill above her head. What happened next took 38 seconds. 38 seconds that a retired warrant officer later told a CBC journalist he would spend the rest of his life trying to explain. Iris Veylan taught grade 3 at Sir Wilfrid Laurier Elementary in Petawawa, Ontario, the kind of small town that exists in the long shadow of CFB Petawawa, where every second family had a deployment calendar on their kitchen wall, and every second Monday carried the particular quiet of people waiting for phones that may or may not ring. She had grown up a civilian, the daughter of a librarian and an electrician from Arnprior, but she had married into the military the way most outsiders do, slowly at first, and then completely. Master Corporal Kieran Veylan had been attached to the K9 section that supported CANSOFCOM taskings abroad. He was not tall or especially broad. He was wiry in the way that distance runners are wiry, with a narrow face, close-cropped dark hair, and the particular stillness of a man who spent a great deal of time in very dangerous places waiting for nothing to happen. He used to pick up strays on their evening walks through the neighborhood and check their tags with the same patient, methodical attention he gave to everything. Iris, briefing documents, the crossword on Saturday mornings. It was not a technique. It was just how he moved through the world. Colt had come into their life by extension. A 4-year-old Belgian Malinois, liver and tan coat, 73 pounds of compressed muscle and focused attention. On base, Colt was a dual-purpose military working dog, explosive detection and apprehension, the kind of asset that deployment coordinators listed on manifests beside vehicles and communications equipment. Off base, on the long weekends Kieran was home, Colt slept curled against the radiator in the living room, chased a tennis ball with the intense, tunnel-visioned absurdity of a dog who had briefly forgotten his other purpose, and allowed Iris to feed him apple slices from her hand with the solemn dignity of a dignitary accepting a treaty gift. The three of them were a quiet unit, compact and self-sufficient in the way of military families who have learned to fill in the gaps around a person who is frequently absent. Kieran shipped out for his 4th rotation in early November. The morning he left, he stood at the kitchen door in full kit and pressed something into Iris's coat pocket while she was hugging him. She did not look at it until he was already in the truck and the street was empty. It was a worn $50 bill, folded into quarters, soft as cloth from handling. On the back in Kieran's cramped block printing, for a real emergency. Not groceries. Love, K. She tucked it into the inside pocket of her winter coat and forgot it was there. Then she remembered it every single day. Kieran died on a Tuesday in a compound in an unnamed region, under operational security conditions that meant the family received a redacted letter and a phone call from his commanding officer before anything else arrived. What Iris pieced together over the months that followed, from the guarded phone conversations with Kieran's teammates and the careful, measured words of the padre who visited twice, was this: Kieran's unit had been extracting a local intelligence asset when the perimeter was breached. In the chaos of the withdrawal, a young signals corporal, barely 22 and 6 months into his first posting abroad, had been cut off from the main group. Kieran had gone back. He had held a doorway long enough for the corporal to reach the exfil vehicle. Colt had worked the flank beside him the entire time, until a fragmentation round clipped his left ear and sent shrapnel into his hind quarters. By the time the vehicle cleared the compound, Kieran had not made it to the door. They said Colt had to be sedated to be removed from the scene. They said it had taken 4 people. Iris sat with that image in the dark for a very long time. The paperwork for Colt's adoption arrived at the base 3 weeks after Kieran's funeral. Iris had driven to CFB Petawawa in the January cold, her breath hanging in the air, and sat across from Lieutenant Colonel Sandra Goff's administrative officer, a polite, visibly tired captain who explained the situation with the careful flatness of someone reading from a policy document they had not written. Colt had not come back from the operation the same dog. In the kennels, he had become, the captain said the word gently, unmanageable. He had stopped eating for days at a time. He had snapped at kennel staff. He had thrown himself against the chain link until the veterinary officer required the kennel master to reinforce the latch hardware in writing. He reacted to anyone in uniform with a ferocity that the base vet described in the incident log as grief response, presenting as extreme aggression. After 6 weeks of failed stabilization attempts, a joint decision had been made. Colt was classified high risk and unsuitable for adoption into a private home. Iris's application, filed within 10 days of Kieran's death, endorsed by 2 of his teammates, was formally denied. Under a provision of the Department of National Defense's surplus asset policy, Colt's specialized training and residual operational value made him eligible for transfer through a controlled surplus auction. A private security firm out of Calgary had already expressed interest. They were prepared to pay considerably more than the DND's reserve price. Iris had read the letter at the kitchen table while the kettle boiled for tea she never poured. She read it twice, then she folded it carefully along its original crease and set it on top of the cedar box that held Kieran's medal citations and his last leave photograph. She did not cry. She sat very still for a long time, the way Kieran used to sit when he was deciding something, and then she went upstairs, opened her winter coat, and pressed her fingers against the folded bill in the inside pocket. For a real emergency, not groceries. She put the coat on, she sat back down at the kitchen table. She waited for morning. Hangar 7 at 8, Wing Trenton, was vast and climate-controlled in the way that all buildings at large Air Force bases are climate-controlled. Mechanically, impersonally, and not quite adequately. The smell was jet fuel and industrial cleaner and the particular metallic cold of a February afternoon in eastern Ontario. The quarterly surplus auction moved through its early lots, vehicles, communications gear, tactical equipment, with efficient workmanlike speed. The K9 section was listed last. Along the north wall, in reinforced transport cornels, stacked 2 high 19 military working dogs awaited reassignment. Standard patrol dogs, Labrador detection dogs, 2 Dutch shepherds. Most were restless, shifting in their enclosures, occasionally barking at the ambient noise of the crowd. The sound was high and frequent, and absorbed into the general noise of the hangar without much difficulty. Colt's kennel had been set separately, behind a portable steel barrier, because Corporal Thibodeau, the kennel master, a grizzled 11-year veteran of military working dog management, had requested the isolation buffer in writing. Even now, behind the barrier, the sounds coming from Lot 31 were not barking. They were something lower and more sustained. Several attendees later described it as a warning they felt in the chest before they heard it with their ears. Douglas Harwick stood near the auctioneer's platform with a black coffee and a folded catalogue, showing no particular interest in the early lots. He was the VP of Operations for Meridian Security Solutions, a Calgary-based firm with active contracts at 4 mining sites in northern Quebec and 2 in the Northwest Territories. Meridian needed a dog that could work a perimeter at -30, wasn't spooked by heavy machinery, and required what Harwick privately called minimal emotional overhead. The file on Lot 31 had described exactly that: exceptional training, residual operational value, and a temperament that would respond to firm, professional handling. He had flown commercial to Toronto and driven the rest. He did not expect the morning to be complicated. Iris Veylan had driven 4 hours from Petawawa in a borrowed Subaru with Noreen Veylan, Kieran's mother, in the passenger seat, and the DND letter folded in her coat pocket. She had not told Noreen what she intended to do. She had told her they were coming to see Colt, to say goodbye, if it came to that. Noreen had looked out the passenger window for most of the drive, and not asked any of the questions she was visibly holding in. The floor was already active when they arrived. Frank Dolan, the auctioneer, heavyset in his 60s, with a controlled and practiced cadence, was moving through the vehicle lots efficiently. Iris and Noreen stood near the back, behind the rope that separated registered bidders from the observing public. Iris held a bidding paddle. Number 44, registered under her name with a $200 deposit she had paid online the night before. She had not told anyone at the registration desk what she intended to bid with. When Dolan reached the K9 section, the room reorganized itself. The polite, diffuse attention of a general surplus crowd sharpened into something more focused. Harwick set down his coffee. Two police chiefs from counties west of Toronto moved closer to the rope. A representative from a private corrections facility in Manitoba re-examined her catalogue page. Lot 31, Dolan said into the microphone, and the double doors at the north end of the hangar swung open. What came through the doors was not the dog Iris had last seen sleeping against her radiator with a tennis ball wedged under his chin. Colt was muzzled, a heavy leather and steel working muzzle, the kind used for dogs that will bite through a standard training muzzle without significantly slowing down. He was on two leads, handled by Thibodeau and a second handler, both of whom were leaning back into their weight against the tension. His liver and tan coat was the same, but his ribs were visible now, and his movement carried the coiled, forward-leaning energy of an animal that had not been permitted to stop being dangerous for a very long time. His eyes swept the room in a rapid, methodical arc, not looking for anything specifically, evaluating everything as a threat. He made a sound when he reached the auction floor. Not a bark. Something older than a bark. A sustained, resonant frequency that landed differently in the body than ordinary sound. Several registered bidders stepped back from the rope, without appearing to notice they were doing it. Full disclosure on Lot 31, Dolan said, steady. Exceptional training profile, dual purpose, combat experienced, currently presenting with severe reactive aggression. Will require extensive professional retraining. He is not, to be direct, a family pet. Reserve is set at 4,000. 4-5, said one of the police chiefs, raising his paddle without enthusiasm. 5,000, said Harwick mildly, still holding his catalogue. Colt lunged toward the sound of the bid. Thibodeau and the second handler braced hard. The sound that came through the muzzle was compressed, but its intention was not. 6, said the corrections facility representative, looking as though she was already reconsidering. 8, said Harwick, glancing at his watch. Iris had counted the steps from the back of the room to the rope when they arrived. 22. She walked all 22 of them, ducked under the velvet rope without breaking stride, and kept walking. She heard Noreen say her name behind her. She heard a security guard begin a sentence. She heard Dolan stop mid-breath. She kept her eyes fixed on Colt, and she kept walking, until she was standing in the center of the auction floor, 6 feet from the handlers and the dog and the noise, with her right arm raised and the creased $50 bill held between her fingers. I bid $50, Iris said. The hangar went quiet in a particular way. Not the silence of people saying nothing, but the silence of people whose next breath had not yet arrived. Harwick made a short, sharp sound that was not quite laughter. Dolan, clear the floor. $50, Iris said again, and her voice broke cleanly in the middle of the second word, and she did not try to prevent it. She kept her eyes on Colt. He is not Lot 31. He is Master Corporal Kieran Veylan's partner. Kieran is gone. Colt is all I have left of him. She said Kieran's name the way she always said his name, quietly and with the specific weight of a name said every day for 6 years. Colt stopped. Not slowed, stopped. The two leads went instantly, completely slack, and Thibodeau pitched forward half a step before catching himself. Colt planted all four paws on the concrete, his ears, pinned flat to his skull since the doors opened, rotated forward. Slowly, the deliberate, precise rotation of an animal taking a precise fix on something. His nose dropped. He pulled the air in 3 short, controlled drafts. He smelled the detergent she used. He smelled the hand cream she had put on in the car. The patchouli one Kieran had complained about every single time, with the specific patience of a person who found the complaining enjoyable. Beneath both of those, under everything, he found the residue of the cedar box on the kitchen table, the one that held the photographs and the citations. The coat she was wearing had been in the closet next to Kieran's gear bag for 14 months. It smelled like his handler's last morning at home. Colt sat down. Thibodeau, who had not seen that dog sit calmly in 11 weeks, stood completely still and did not touch the leads. Then, from the north wall, something happened. The 19 military working dogs in their kennels had been in a state of sustained, ambient agitation since the auction began. Stress, unfamiliar handling, noise. They had been barking and pacing and pressing against their kennel doors in the low-grade collective restlessness of working animals, removed from routine. They stopped. Not gradually. In a span of approximately 4 seconds, all of them stopped. The barking cut off as though a signal had been interrupted. The pacing ceased. Through the steel mesh of their enclosures, one by one, the Labradors and the Dutch Shepherds and the patrol dogs turned their heads toward the center of the hangar, toward the woman standing alone on the auction floor with a $50 bill and a winter coat that smelled of someone they recognized as belonging to this work. They did not bark again, they sat. 19 military working dogs at attention in a silence so complete that the sound of Colt's claws on the concrete as he crawled slowly forward, dragging the slack leads, ignoring Thibodeau entirely, his belly low, was the only sound in Hangar 7. Dolan lowered the hammer. He looked at the floor. He looked at Harwick. Harwick was not moving. His catalogue was not open. His expression had shifted into something that did not belong in a surplus auction, something that had crossed some internal meridian and come out the other side of itself. Colt reached Iris. He pressed his muzzled face into her midsection, directly over the inside pocket of the coat, directly over the folded bill. The sound that came from his chest was not a growl. It was the precise opposite of a growl, a sound that started deep and had nowhere to go but out. Iris's arms went around his neck. She pressed her cheek into the coarse fur behind his ear and held on. The sharp crack of boots on concrete preceded Lieutenant Colonel Sandra Goff by about 4 seconds. She had come personally to observe the transfer of Lot 31, a precaution, given the documented risk, and she arrived at the rope barricade with the expression of a person whose morning had gone significantly off script. Dolan, her voice was flat and controlled, suspend the bidding. That animal is a liability issue. I want the dog and the civilian off this floor immediately. Ma'am, Dolan held the hammer at his side. The floor is active. The standing bid is at 8,000. I cannot legally suspend without a formal withdrawal. The bid at 8,000, said Harwick from where he stood, is being withdrawn. The room looked at him. He set his catalogue down on the nearest folding chair. He removed a chequebook from his inside pocket and uncapped a pen with a motion that was deliberate and completely unhurried. Meridian Security Solutions is withdrawing the bid at $8,000, he said, and submitting a revised bid, $45,000, payable immediately and in full. He looked at Goff without particular hostility. That covers the reserve price, the full training valuation, and whatever administrative inconvenience your legal office wants to include in the paperwork. Dolan, call it. The silence stretched long enough to have a texture. "The bid is $45,000, Dolan said, and his voice had changed, taken on a quality it had not carried all morning. Going once, a long pause. Going twice, the hammer came down. The sound was final and clean. Sold. Goff looked at Harwick with the expression of someone who has been thoroughly outmaneuvered and has decided to accept it with dignity. She said nothing further. Harwick tore the check from the book and handed it to Dolan. Then he walked to the center of the floor at a steady pace. Thibodeau and the second handler stepped back without being asked. Colt tracked the approach without aggression, simply watched, still pressed against Iris, his breathing slower now than it had been in 11 weeks. Harwick crouched down and placed the transfer receipt on the concrete floor. He slid it toward Iris's feet. "In 2010, he said quietly, "I was in Haiti on a contract. The earthquake hit while I was in Pétionville. I was trapped under a collapsed stairwell for 31 hours. He paused. A Canadian Forces working dog team found me. The dog's name was Briar. The handler drank nothing for 6 hours, so I could have the last of his water." He looked at the name written in permanent marker on the inside hem of Iris's coat. I. Veylan, written there years ago so she would stop taking Kieran's things, which she had continued taking anyway. "I spent 11 years trying to find that handler," Harwick said. "I know it wasn't Kieran Veylan, but I've carried a debt to somebody in this uniform for a very long time." He stood, straightened his jacket, and looked at Iris with an expression that had nothing transactional left in it. "Consider it settled." He walked back toward the chairs, picked up his coffee, and did not look back. Colt came home to Petawawa in the back seat of the borrowed Subaru, his head out the window despite the February cold. Noreen watching him from the front seat with an expression she would not try to describe for months. He filled the car with the particular warmth of a large dog who has decided, provisionally, to stop moving for a while. For the first 10 days, he would not come inside the house. He slept on the back porch on a folded emergency blanket, and Iris watched him from the kitchen window at 2 in the morning, standing at the fence line in the dark, scanning the empty yard with the sustained focus of a dog still running an operation that no longer had a handler. The base veterinarian had given her a written protocol. A behaviorist in Ottawa had sent a consultation document. Iris read everything. Then she went out to the porch and sat beside Colt in the cold and read her grade 3 lesson plans aloud, because it was the only thing she could think of to do that was not trying to fix him. She was not his trainer. She was not a handler. She was the person who used to share a kitchen with the man he was still looking for. That had to be enough, or it would not work at all. She did that every night for 12 nights. On the 13th night, a storm came up from Lake Ontario, with the particular violence of a late winter front. Sustained crackling, the kind of lightning that strobe lit the whole sky white at once and left the dark darker for it. Iris heard Colt before she saw him. Not aggression, not grief exactly, but something that was trying very hard to hold the line between the two. She went out in her socks. He was pressed flat against the sliding glass door, his entire body shaking in a fine, uncontrollable tremor, his eyes showing white at the edges. It was not the sound of a dangerous dog. It was the sound of a dog who had used up everything he had on being dangerous, and had nothing left for whatever this was. Iris sat down on the cold concrete beside him. She did not move toward him. She took off her outer sweater and spread it across his back. She sat close enough that her shoulder was against his flank, and she could feel the trembling through her own body. "I've got you," she said, in the same register she used in the classroom when a 7-year-old was trying not to cry and needed not to be made into a spectacle of it. "I'm not going anywhere. We're okay. We hold the line right here." The trembling did not stop for a long time. Then it slowed. Then, by increments so gradual she almost missed each one, it stopped. Colt raised his head and looked at Iris. She would not let herself put words to what his expression was, because she had learned, in 14 months of grief, that the translation of one creature's inner life into another's language was where the mistakes happened. She only watched him. He stood up. He nosed the sliding glass door open with the practiced efficiency of a dog for whom doors were an operational problem with a known solution. He walked into the living room. He walked to the foot of her bed, circled twice, and lay down with a long, shuddering exhalation, the kind that sounds like a sound a house makes when it settles. He was still there in the morning. He was there every morning after that. In early November, 6 months later, Iris drove to Ottawa for Remembrance Day. It was the first time she had attended the ceremony at the National War Memorial since Kieran's name had been formally entered into the books of remembrance. She brought Colt. Veterans Affairs had granted special dispensation, given his service record. And Noreen sat in the back and talked to him continuously for the entire 2.5-hour drive in the same tone she used for long conversations with her garden, which seemed, to Colt, to be entirely sufficient. The ceremony was cold and grey, and enormous in the way that Ottawa Remembrance Day ceremonies are enormous. Flags and uniforms and the compressed, collective weight of grief distilled into 11 minutes between 10:50 and 11 o'clock. Colt stood at the outer edge of the crowd beside Iris, his shoulder against her leg, calm in a way that still caught her off guard sometimes. The same dog, an entirely different dog, both of these things remaining true simultaneously. After the ceremony, as the crowd began to move, Colt turned. Not toward the parking lot, not toward the street. He turned with the specific loaded intentionality of a dog who has caught something in the air that requires immediate and non-negotiable attention. And before Iris had fully registered what was happening, the lead went taut and he was moving, not frantic, but purposeful, navigating the dispersing crowd as though the route was already plotted. She followed him. He pulled her past the tomb of the unknown soldier, past a cluster of veterans in their regimental blazers, to a section of the memorial's outer walkway where a temporary display had been mounted for the anniversary. A panel of photographs and brief citations from recent operations, printed large enough to be read from a short distance. Colt stopped in front of one photograph. He sat. He raised his right paw and placed it, with a precision that was not incidental, against the lower edge of the display panel, against the photograph of a young man in desert kit, grinning at the camera with the open, unguarded expression of someone having a good day in a difficult place. The caption read, "Corporal Jasper Arnaud, survived Operation Redacted, currently serving." Iris stood very still. She had heard the name exactly once. 8 months ago, in a phone call from one of Kieran's teammates, offered carefully, in the way people offer information they know will hurt and believe should be known anyway. Corporal Arnaud had been the signals operator cut off during the withdrawal, the one who had made it to the vehicle because Kieran had held the doorway long enough. The one who was alive and currently serving and would not, in any official capacity, be permitted to explain why. Colt had not been told any of this. He did not need to be. He had been there at Kieran's side in the doorway in the last minutes before everything went quiet. He had been present for the thing that mattered. He had not forgotten who they went back for. Iris knelt beside him on the November concrete, her hand resting flat on his back. She looked at the photograph of Corporal Arnaud, young and grinning and alive, and she felt something shift in her chest that was not quite grief and not quite relief, and was in some way the most honest thing she had felt in a very long time. Colt lowered his paw after a while. He turned toward Iris and pressed his forehead against her shoulder with a gentleness so entirely inconsistent with the dog from Hangar 7 that she closed her eyes and let it settle. "I know," she said. "I know he did." They stayed there for a while in the November cold, while the flags came down around them and the crowd thinned and the trumpets went silent. Colt did not move until Iris stood. Then he stood beside her, shoulder to her leg, and they walked back through the memorial together. The woman and the dog and the $50 bill still folded in the inside pocket of her coat, untouched, exactly where Kieran had put it. She had not spent it. She would not spend it. Some things you keep not because you are saving them, but because they are already precisely what they were always meant to be. The proof that someone who loved you understood, before you did, exactly what you were going to need. Colt had lost his handler in a doorway in the dark. He had carried that loss through the kennels and the auction floor, and 13 cold nights on a back porch in Petawawa, and he had set it down, not forgotten, never forgotten, at the foot of a bed in a small house in a military town where the woman who had also been left behind was still learning to hold the line on her own. His mission had not ended in the compound. It had followed him home. It had only just begun.